Okay, so moving on to it from attachment theory, we'll now look at the cognitive development or the cognitive domain. And the person or the theorist who's very big here is Piaget, and we're looking at his stages of cognitive development or what he proposes or purports to be the stages of cognitive development. So he says from 0 to 2 years, the stage is the sensory motor stage, and this coordination of senses with motor responses. So you're using your senses to affect the way your arms and legs move, and so on. The sensory curiosity about the world. So you're going and trying to explore the world. That's why children putting things in their mouth and touching things and smelling things because they want to interact with their world. Language is used for demands and cataloging, and object permanence is developed. So what is object permanence? Object permanence usually develops around, if I'm correct, 18 months. And so what this means is if you show a child a doll and they want the doll, but you hide the doll, before object permanence is developed, the child thinks that the doll no longer exists. So if they don't see it, it doesn't exist. And this is why around 18 months, and I need to research it just to make sure I'm getting the date right, but around this time is when the child is going to start crying for their mom. I actually think I'm wrong. I don't think it's 18 months. I think it's a little bit earlier than that. I think I just got confused there. But in terms of object permanence, it means that the child now knows that even if things are not there, they still exist. Okay, so apologies, I was very wrong. Object permanence is between 4 and 7 months, and the reason I realized I was incorrect because I was thinking about my daughter, and way before 18 months that she would cry if her mom or dad was not, if she wanted a mom and a dad. So object permanence happens when the child starts to recognize the caregivers and they want to be with the caregiver, because before then, babies are kind of like, they do know their mom, but they will be okay if they're quite small and they're by someone else. So when object permanence develops, they do realize that if something is not there, so that it's around memory. What do they remember? What do they know to be real? So even if you hide their doll, they no longer think that the doll disappeared and doesn't exist, but rather they know that the doll is still there and they'll go to look for it. Okay, and so the pre-operational phase is between 2 and 7 years. This is when symbolic thinking takes place and the use of proper syntax and grammar to express concepts. The imagination and intuition are strong, but complex abstract thoughts are still difficult. So abstract thinking for them is quite difficult, and they're more concrete in their thinking. So they can't think about things in a more philosophical way, and they're only 2 or 7 years old. Conservation is developed. Okay, and then 7 to 11 years, concrete operational, concrete attachment to concrete situations and time and space. So things need to make sense for them. And so around these ages or these two ages, you'll see kids are still counting on their fingers. Their strategies, especially in the pre-operational and the early concrete operational phase, they're doing things like counting on their fingers, and they need beads and things to really work things out. Things have to be concrete, which is real. So they're very concrete and specific in their thinking. You can't give them a metaphor. You can't say it is something like, when you say something to them, they take it as it is. That's the real thing. You can't just make examples of a random nature. The formal operational stage is between 11 years and older. That's the year is where the theoretical thinking, hypothetical thinking comes in. Abstract logic and reasoning, strategy and planning concepts learned in one context can be applied to another. So if I do something at one place, I know that it can be done somewhere else. Okay, so Piaget's stages of cognitive development. This is the same thing that we spoke about earlier, but it's just explained in a different way. So the sensory motor stage is experiencing the world through the senses, like I said, and touching and looking and mouthing and grasping. And they do have strange anxiety because they start to figure out that who the stranger is and who the person is that they know or who is part of their lives. From 2 to 6 or 7 years old is the pre-operational phase again, and this is when they're engaging in pretend play and egocentrism, where it's like about me, and then the stages then go on from there. So this cognitive development stage, and especially if you look at Piaget's theory, we can understand our learners in terms of how they're performing in class. And if you say things to them, they pretty much take it as that is how it is. That is why oftentimes when children come home and they said, my teacher said, they're usually in this age here and maybe early on in this stage. So they're very much in the place where they take what he said at school as that is like the most definite part of it. That's the most definite thing. The teacher said so, so it must be that way. So that is why sometimes it becomes a little frustrating when the teacher said so, but they don't necessarily listen to when moms or dad says so. That's just a bit of an explanation of why children engage in those types of behavior, as well as counting on their fingers, counting on beads, using strategies that involve the real objects. For example, a child that I worked with not too long ago, when he had to do work out time, he actually looked for a clock so he could work and count time on. So they can't really do the strategy where they have it in their head. They have to physically have something like a ruler to count numbers or count space and so on and so forth. Okay, another domain would be model development, and we look at Kohlberg's model development, and he looks at various stages, and he says in stage 1, which is infancy, there's no difference between doing right and wrong and or to avoid punishment, and that's quite early on in the infancy stage. Then he looks at the level of self-interest, which is preschool, and the interest shifts to rewards rather than punishment, and effort is made to secure the greatest benefit for oneself. So how can I get the best out of a situation? We see that with kids quite a bit. Then in stage 2, conformity and interpersonal accord, which is the school age, the boy-girl level, effort is made to secure approval and maintain friendly relations with others. Also in stage 2, which is continuation of the school-going age, authority and social order, orientation towards fixed rules. The purpose of morality is to maintain the social order, and interpersonal accordance expanded to include the entire society. Okay, so I'm not going to read all of this. You can read this on the time it is suitable for you. But essentially, Kohlberg talks about when various elements of moral development is attained. And so you can understand when you're working with kids, especially like in the preschool age, you can understand why they sometimes don't understand why elements of the behavior is not acceptable. So this is just part of you understanding the learner in your classroom. This is not for you to specifically know the theory and know exactly what's going on, but this is about you understanding the child in your classroom and why they're behaving the way that they are. Okay, so now I'm just looking a little bit at, we're going to go into physical development now. But you can, things like this are helping you to understand. I used the young age, and you can obviously find these for older ages as well. But this is helping to understand the various milestones that children do go through. So, for example, in the 6 month stage, you can see they turn their head when you call their name, they smile back at you, they respond to sounds and making sounds, and so on and so forth. So, why am I talking about this and why at this stage? The reason is because if you see difficulties at this stage, it's most likely going to have an impact on the later stage as well, number one. Also, I want you to understand that what type of elements we're looking at when we're looking at the various stages. So the assessment for this unit is most likely going to be on the domain, or it is actually on the domains, but it's most likely going to be a choice for you to choose what domain you're going to be focusing on and exactly what the milestones of that phase must be. So I'm giving you here an example of what the milestones are for various stages and ages. You're going to be working at the age 5 years and up, so we're only going until 4 years in this video. So you can look at what are milestones in terms of physical development, in terms of social development, in terms of cognitive development that we have at each stage. And you need to then pull this out to help you understand why children do the things that they do. So for example, like I said earlier, why are children still counting on their fingers when they're in the maths classroom? It's because they're at a pre-operational or concrete stage of development, as Piaget calls it. So this helps you understand why children behave the way that they do. And so it's important for us again to understand milestones within the child's development. Okay, so we're going to look at physical development. Now, I'm not going to talk about all physical development, but I've chosen to talk about fine and gross motor development because it's very interesting, but also something that you're going to have to deal with quite a bit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about fine motor and gross motor development, and then we're going to watch a video that I know I can refer you to, but I think it's easier for us to watch the video within the video. And then we'll probably have to go on to that in the next video. But I'm going to talk a little bit about fine motor and gross motor development. We'll watch a video about it and I'll break it down further. As we go along, you'll understand why I say fine motor and gross motor development is exceptionally important. And then I'm also going to take you to a website page to talk to talk about graphomotor skills. You don't have to know all of these in details, but I want you to have a background of it so that when you're standing in the classroom, it's easy for you to identify issues within the classroom space because you know what to look for. Okay, so in terms of fine motor skills, what are fine motor skills? So fine motor skills we use fine motor skills to make small movements. So these movements, they usually come quite naturally to most people, and we don't even think about it. Then fine motor skills are very complex. Okay, so they involve like basically your brain and your muscles need to be coordinated, and we build fine motor skills on gross motor skills, and the gross motor skills are what we do to help us with the bigger movements. So, but we're going to talk about this more in the next couple of videos. Use gross motor skill to do everyday things like that involve large muscles. So things like exercising, or raking leaves, or sweeping, or so the big things that we do using our arms and our legs. And most people also use these easily. It comes automatically, but they're very complex as well. So these skills, they involve the coordination of muscles and the neurological system. So everything is connected, the brain, the muscles, everything is connected. Your nerves are connected. So if there is a difficulty in one section, then it affects everything, as we know. This affects balance and coordination, your gross motor skills, and they also form the basis of the fine motor skills that help us. So the fine motor skills, as you can see in this picture, is the little things. We're using our fingers, we're using our wrists, we're using our eyes, and it's a very fine work. Usually, girls are quite good in fine motor skills. Why? Because it's a kind of games we give them to play. We give them things like, apologies for that, we give them things like beading, so they have to put beads, and they have to do sewing, and they have to feed the baby, and they have to pour tea into the cup. So because of the way society is structured, we develop fine motor skills a lot more in our girls. And what then happens? They're really good at beading and doing all these fine little things, and then we think girls are good at it, but actually the toys that we're giving our children is what is developing their fine motor skills. So think about that. We're actually creating the kind of environment for our children to develop gender normative skills. That's why girls can do the sewing things, and sometimes boys can't do these little things. And we think, it's because he's a boy, he has bigger fingers. But no, it's what you give children to do as little ones that develops the skills. Gross motor skills, so it's a lot around jumping and hopping and climbing trees and playing sport. And who's very good at this? Boys. Why? Because boys can get to be more rough and tumble, where we tell girls, no, be careful, you need to be careful, and boys get to jump. I'm not saying everybody, but this is usually what happens. So boys are developing their gross motor skills, so they're better at sport, and they seem to be. Now, this is a debate we have a lot, but they say that men are better drivers. So if this is true, I'm not admitting that it is true, but if this is true, it could be because they have been able to develop their gross motor skills a lot more, which means that the way that they respond quicker in the moment has been better developed because of the focus on gross motor skills. Yes, fine motor skills is also needed, but gross motor skills is very much involved in your reaction time. And this is also why men can, for example, play sports as much as they do, because these are the skills that have been developed in them as children. So how interesting are all of these things? And so the more we think about it, the more we realize that maybe we're actually creating what we're seeing in society. Okay, so this is just a quick thing. It's from the website. I'm going to show you the website. It's up here, study.com, Academy Lessons, what are graphomotor skills. So basically, they say, why can't Johnny write? He's in the 3rd grade. He's a fluent reader, has no trouble with comprehension. Johnny spells his words out perfectly at home when his mother quizzes him, but he's confused because he continues to perform poorly on spelling tests. He cannot seem to spell correctly when asked to write words on paper. What is going on with Johnny? Why can he not transfer his spelling knowledge to written form? Is it possible that Johnny is lacking certain skills for accuracy in writing? He may have a disability or deficit in graphomotor skills. So what are graphomotor skills? Those are the skills that we require for writing. While it sounds simple, a lot goes into the process of being able to write something by hand. It requires a fine balance of several different skills, and when one or more of the skills or specific skills underdeveloped or fall short, the whole process can be thrown off. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but it's interesting for us to understand why children have difficulty in areas and how it affects things like writing and drawing and all of those finer skills that are necessary for school and for school readiness and handwriting and so on and so forth.